If you like nature-themed board games like Everdell, or maybe add in some set collection like Parks, then I think you are really going to enjoy Honeybuzz. Hello, my favorite board gamers. Yes, that is you. That is you tuning in, watching this video, hanging out with me right now as we are going to discuss Honeybuzz, which is all about building up your beehive and introducing some very interesting worker placement and engine building mechanics. Two of my favorite mechanics of all time. So, without further ado, in Honeybuzz, you are trying to build up your beehive. Now in Honeybuzz, the queen bee is entrusting you with building up and expanding the beehive. Up top, we have the places where you can place all of your different tiles. And on the bottom board, there are 2 boards total. You have where you are competing with others to collect nectar on the left side, and on the right side is also a chart where you will be selling different honey and pollen too on the right. Once this board is fully set up, it looks something like this. So all you're doing on your turn is taking one of your worker bees. Everyone starts off with just one. Look at these adorable little worker bees. And you're gonna take this bee and then place it on any region located on the top part of the board. There are 6 of them and they're all free except one. This one right here actually costs 5 money in order to place your worker there. The other ones are all free. So naturally, since I only have 1 bee, I'm gonna take this bee and then place it over here on the top. That's gonna allow me to take this tile. Now, what I'm gonna do with this tile is actually place it into my starting beehive and create an empty cell just like that. After that, here comes one of the most interesting parts about Honeybuzz. Because when you create that empty cell, it's going to activate every single action listed in that hexagon that you've just made. So in this hexagon, I have 1, 2, 3 symbols. This one, like I mentioned earlier, is a wild, but this one means I can now produce 2 more bees, but I don't get them right away because we're gonna hatch them first. So I'm gonna take 2 from my pile and then place them up top over here. And then with my wild action, I can perform any of the other ones. So let me quickly go over them. Aside from the wild and the bee, you have this one which produces 5 money. Now if I were to take this action over here, it's called forage. Now forage is super important. With this action, I can send my furry little blue bee, and with this bee, I'm gonna send it off to collect some nectar. And it can also move orthogonally, which means in any direction. And it can only move 1 space at a time unless I pay 2 money per space. But right now, I'm actually looking at this one, which is Wildflower. Even though it's the cheapest one, it's the one that I can actually fit in this pattern shown here on the bottom. Because if you'll notice these orange lines, they are fully connected. And this is the only fully connected orange line that I can currently collect. Ideally, I want to collect Acacia, but Acacia is A, too far away, and B, I don't have that pattern for it just yet. So I'm gonna adapt like my typical gaming strategy is, and I'm gonna collect Wildflower. So with Wildflower, I'm gonna put my bee right here, take that tile, and place it into my center empty cell. Now that is the forage action, but the whole point of this game is to make the most amount of money. How do you do that? Well, here comes the 5th action, and that is produce. With produce, this tile here shown with the fan, I can place this fan and I can put it in any spot on my hive. Right now I only have 1 nectar, so I'm just gonna place it right here, and that's going to produce honey. So I'm gonna take this jelly looking honey and place it right on here, so Wildfire has now produced honey. Now what's really cool about produce is that wherever you put that fan, it's going to actually make honey in any adjacent nectar that's open and available. So if I were to have a cell here and here, then it will produce honey as well. Now with that, finally, what I can do with this honey is sell it to the market, or I can use it to give it to these little critters here and complete their orders. If I were to sell them to the market, for instance, if I had 4 Wildflower, then it would be 4 times right now the current value of it is 6, so that would be 24 money, and that's a lot. And then the next person is actually going to sell it at 5, and these are actually one of the end game conditions, which is when 4 of these go to the bottommost value, that's one way to trigger end game. But also, aside from selling it to the market, you'll notice here how I have 3 different critters. Let's say I send it to this raccoon critter over here. It's going to need 1 Wildflower and 1 cherry blossom. Turn that in and I get 7 points. Now, once 2 of these stacks are gone, that is the second way to also trigger end game as well. And when you complete an order, you also perform the action that's listed on the bottom of that column. So for here, if I were to complete this order, I would be able to forage one more time. And since my bee can't collect any more tiles because I don't have any more empty cells, it can stay here on this empty cell and then collect these little backpack tokens for the deluxe upgrades, and this is pollen. Pollen, you notice here, has its own separate column, but I can also sell it for money as well. Okay, last thing I want to mention about this game is that there are also orders that are variable. There are a ton of different cards to choose from, but here are some basic cards. We have 3 nectar of any type, and you'll compete for it. So the first person to do that will score 20 money. Whoever has the most orders by the end of the game will get 20 extra points. And whoever has the most nectar, which are these tiles over here, will also get 20 points as well. So there are typically 2 endgame conditions and 1 like mid-game or in-progress condition that you can fulfill as well. Okay, the bottom line, in order to win this game, you have to have the most amount of money. You make money by fulfilling orders. You can fulfill orders by getting honey. And you can also sell honey in a separate part here to the market in order for you to score money as well. To do so, you need nectar. You gotta send your bees to forage for nectar. In order for you to forage, you have to place your worker bee onto this region over here, collect that tile, but if other people want to place in that region as well, they, forgot to mention, also have to place one more bee than what's already there. So that also creates a very, very unique and very interesting part of gameplay as well. Okay, if you are liking the video so far, please don't forget to subscribe because we are on the path to 20,000 subs and I can't do that without you. Okay, here's my favorite part about Honeybuzz, and that is this shift in priority. At first, what I've kind of leaned towards for strategy here is building up your army of bees at first and then spreading them out. And I love this shift in priority because at first, you only start off with a single bee, and that becomes problematic real quick because in this region, I now have to place 3 bees just to take this one tile. Once you have gathered most, if not all of your honeybees, here's where that shift comes in, because now you pretty much eliminate one action from your set of choices. And there's this funneling system that makes you really think about your critical choices and like, should I go for all this nectar first? Should I compete for this contest? Should I stock up on pollen in order for me to sell to the market and just get a whole bunch of pollen at once? Or maybe other players are already so close to completing this contest and I actually want to end game fast because I have a ton of pollen that I want to sell to the market. So I'm going to try to get rid of these orders right away. And then you start thinking about, wait, is it worth it to stack 3 bees for me to forage right now? Or should I really waste 5 money in order for me to get a wild action? Because money is gonna be those victory points, like they're interchangeable by the end. Money is victory points. Is it worth it to get a wild action but lose 5 money? So I love this shift that you're constantly thinking about and how you have to adapt to what everyone else is doing, where everyone else's bees are, and it just makes gameplay incredibly interesting and challenging. Okay, number 2, I'm gonna piggyback off of that previous point in that shifting priorities is really cool. I'm gonna piggyback off of that point a little bit in that the second highlight for me is that the endgame conditions are malleable. Let me explain. In one game, which by the way, I played this once at the 2-player count and twice at the 4-player count, but in one game of the 4-player count, they were all completing for these orders at the bottom, and I didn't complete any orders at all. Instead, what I was doing was stockpiling pollen, and then I was trying to sell these all at once. But by the time that they stopped selling orders and they wanted to start selling pollen and rosemary, these were already down here, all the way down to like 4. So it wasn't even worth it for them to actually sell the rosemary and the pollen. And the last person was competing for these 2 contests, most nectar and 3 nectar of any one type. And by the end, we were relatively close to each other. It was a very close game. So that's what I mean by malleable conditions, in that we were all clawing for the top at different angles, and yet we still ended up around the same area. And I love that because it makes the game so fierce. It makes the competition so fierce. It just makes everything way more cutthroat than you would imagine so, especially in a game that looks like this. And I love that. It was so much fun. Now notice here how I rave about the 4-player experience, because this brings me to point number 3, which is I feel like this game scales better with a higher player count. Reason why is because there's way more player interaction and it's way more fulfilling and satisfying to compete with other people for these contests. For instance, when we were playing a 2-player game, Jackie, my fiance, was the first person to get the 3 nectar of any type. And then after that, it's just like, okay, So it's almost anticlimactic, like, oh, you're the first one to complete that contest, but it's just me and you competing for it. And with more players, there's way more intensity on the board for not only diverging your actions to collecting nectar, to be the first ones to get these tiles up top, to be selling these in the orders that you need, because if I'm competing for rosemary and another person is competing for rosemary, these are gonna constantly drop. So there's just way more of all those actions happening all at once. There's also this interconnectivity between collecting nectar and actually using the foraging action, because you have to think about getting more bees, which again connects to over here because I need more bees by getting this action or taking a wild. All circles back to here, and you have to think about how many bees you can use here or how many bees you should use for this one tile. And then bring it back over here with this foraging action, these tiles run out way faster in a 4-player game, and it's way more interesting because just imagine all of these bees buzzing around and collecting different tiles all at once. With 2 players, these 2 columns are gone. And focusing on just these 4 is just kind of this back and forth, like, okay, you collect the tile and I collect the tile. So 2 players isn't bad, but if you're looking for way more player interaction, I think this game really shines at 3 and 4 players, especially at 4. Okay, I want to mention 2 other points about Honeybuzz, what I love about Honeybuzz. The first one is with the worker placement / mini engine building that you're focusing on during your turn. So on your turn, you only do 2 actions, right? You take a bee or you bring them back eventually. And when you do those things, you're trying to complete a cell like I mentioned earlier. You only take your actions when you complete a cell. And when you line up your actions in this hexagon and chain them all off together, it's so satisfying to complete. For instance, here I'm gonna start off with foraging and get this tile. And then I'm going to use produce, put my fan over here, and then produce on all of those. So I'm gonna grab some cherry blossoms, some rosemary, and another rosemary. I then can go to the market and fulfill this order, scoring me 9 victory points right away. And then I also have 1 wild action left. So with this order completed, what I can do with this wild action is produce again and make everything 1 more time. And on my next turn, I can then sell all of these to the market, score a bunch more points. So I love this compartmentalized engine building aspect that is different. It's dynamic depending on what you place there. That's also a downside that you should consider if you're thinking about buying this game, is that if your group or if you are prone to like analysis paralysis, there are a ton of decisions that you have to think about on your turn. Yes, the actions are simple, but there are a lot of layers that you have to consider when you place your tile. For instance, if I were to get a tile, I have so many different options for me to place it in. I can place it here, here, over here might be the best one, and then the order of action that you take in that turn. If you're the type of gamer that likes to really maximize and squeeze out the efficiency of your actions, this game may be a lot longer than you think. Okay, here's the last point I want to mention about why Honeybuzz I think is so creative and really tight and succinct in the play interaction. Because there is this downward curve in practically all the actions that you take in Honeybuzz. You can't just think about this game in a single-minded fashion. Because if I were to capitalize on having the most bees so I can go to any space, guess what? You're gonna run out of bees. And ultimately out of tiles too. If I were to try to capitalize on producing the most acacia and then selling it to the market, guess what? The values decrease, so it goes from 8 all the way down to 3. If I were to compete in the contest, I only win that once. And do you see how interesting this game becomes? Because you really have to diversify your actions and think about this game in a multifaceted way. You have to approach this game from many different angles. And that's what keeps this game constantly interesting for me. It's frustrating because I always lose to Jackie, but it makes me want to play again and again. On top of that, having players compete for multiple things at once and being able to be the best at different things all at once too. Someone can be the best at collecting nectar, someone can be the best at having the most bees, someone can have the most honey in order to sell to the market. And on top of all that, having everyone feel like they're winning is a great thing for this game, even though you're competing against each other, because even if I'm completing the most orders, well, guess what? I am actually selling the most over here in the market, and another person is already fulfilling out different contests. So having every player almost specialize in a couple of different things makes them feel like they're winning, and it really makes you want to see how it unfolds and how the rest of the game plays out. With that said, here is my final rating for Honeybuzz. I'm giving this game a 4 out of 5. There's this shift in priority that constantly keeps the game fresh. This race for endgame conditions is malleable, and there's this constant clawing for the top that makes it incredibly interesting. Number 3, there's this really unique compartmentalized engine building mechanic where the theme is so tightly integrated with this, how you're building out your beehive and you're chaining your actions as you complete each cell. Number 4, having to constantly compete with other players for different spaces on the top part of the board versus nectar versus selling to the market and orders, all that. And giving the flexibility to every player to navigate towards different goals really makes everyone feel like they're winning and keeps the player interaction constant. The only downside is that I wish they played better at 2 players because it does scale better with the more players that you introduce into this game. One other little gripe to mention, and that is these pieces. I wish they were actually like squishy, like they're not rigid, but they're not squishy. It kind of kills me that they're in between. I wish they were like berry squishy, like Everdell. And they also don't really reflect, like it's kind of hard to tell which one's which. Between Cherry Blossom, Wildflower, and Rosemary, I just wish they were more distinguishable because we were kind of confused with the first couple games, and even until now, I still have to refer back to the rulebook to see which one's which. So with that said, I hope you all enjoyed my review on Honey Buzz. Thank you all so much for hanging out with me. I've had so much fun with this game, but don't let the fun, whimsical, beautiful artwork detract you from how cutthroat it really is. Just a good thing for me. But let me know in the comments if you have played Honey Buzz, if Honey Buzz is on your radar at least. And I'm also looking for more worker placement games themed like this, and also like Everdell and Parks, like I mentioned in the very beginning of the video. So if you have any titles in mind to recommend after Honey Buzz, please let me know in the comments below, and I will see you all in the next video.